Okay, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started today. We're glad that everybody has tuned in today to for session 3 and 4 of our Tier 1 result demonstration trainings. This morning, we're going to talk about really give you an introduction to applied research and a little bit about that. We have a great slate of speakers for you today, and really looking forward to hearing from everybody that's going to be taking part today. To begin this morning, we're going to talk about the characteristics of effective result demonstrations and applied research trials. And we have with us somebody that certainly understands what a good trial looks like and how to establish a good trial. Terry Siders, he's the extension agent for IPM out in Hockley County. He has a long history of doing very high quality applied research. The industry in West Texas really relies pretty heavily on some folks in some of the roles like our IPM agents, and Kerry certainly delivers with good quality, cutting edge information that has an impact on the ag industry out there. So I'm going to turn it over to Kerry, and Kerry, it's all yours.
So I was charged with, discussing the characteristics of an effective ag demonstration applied research projects. And one thing that, let me go to the next slide here. I found that title, Agricultural Demonstration Applied Research Project, right there from our signs that we received. Through the years, we get those things, and we call it all sorts of things. Result demonstration, Daryl used a term a while ago, but anyway, I wanted to just kind of throw that out there on our signs. It simply says Agricultural Demonstration and Applied Research Project, and those signs are appropriate for whichever projects whatever type we're using. But in putting this talk together, I did it somewhat independently from a paper that Dr. Drumgoole put together some time back, and it's called Result Demonstrations, a Method That Works. And even though I did it independently, it really matches up very closely to Dr. Drumgoole's thoughts. And I guess the point being there is that, this process, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. It is a proven recipe for success in itself. And so I just wanted to maybe touch on some of the characteristics, but I would encourage you to look for that article, and Dr. Drumgoole may want to include that later I don't know if that's been sent out in these packets from Rebecca or not, but it's called Result Demonstrations, a Method That Works. And it's an excellent discussion of some of the things that I'm going to touch on as well. So these characteristics, and I don't know that I'd necessarily call them characteristics, but the major categories that we first start thinking about is the plan, obviously, and then implementation. Then at some point we will evaluate and finally make some improvements on that process. And that's kind of one that's a little unique in itself, but we'll talk about that. So starting with the plan, we've got to start with the plan. Of course, ideas come from all different sources, our committees and such, but at some point we've got to develop a plan. We got to start with a good plan, develop the project, and again, whether it's from one of our committees or a committee from another organization, wheat growers, or particularly our specialists. Let me move this out of the way. I'm not sure I can. Industry folks possibly could get involved. And I would say anybody that has a vested interest. Of course, I think generally in terms of row crops, but if you're in an area where you've got greenhouse industry, or obviously we all have cattle and range and wildlife, you know, those folks would be involved in those type of projects. So get them involved right up front in the planning. Have a good hypothesis. You know, many of us that, you know, kind of specialize in this area at the university level may have taken a lot of, you know, experimental design and analysis and statistics and various things that may help. But a hypothesis is very, you know, simple. Of what is the question that you're trying to address? And you really need to lay that out and ask that question. And that's what a hypothesis is this better than, you know, if you're going after insects or weeds or, you know, an ear tag project or a tomato greenhouse project, whatever it might be, ask the question of what it is that you're trying to answer a question. And from all this, then you develop a protocol. That protocol is simply just a list of treatments, products, rates. I mentioned, you know, tomato trial. Well, the varieties or a way to protect them, or, you know, or ear tags or whatever it might be. Brush control is a good one too. I mean, there's so many examples out there, things that we do throughout the state, but have a list of treatments, and then a plot plan. Have a plot plan, whether and describe if it's going to be a strip trial, you know, in terms of a demonstration where you're not really, you know, you're just demonstrating some commercially available products or processes that are already known. The research has already been done, but lay out a plot plan and know the size and the shape and how this thing's going to be laid out. So when you actually get to the field or get to where you're going to implement the project, you know what it looks like. And a randomized complete block design. What happened there? And then list out the data that you're going to collect and the timing of that, and the details of what the setting will be. Is it going to be in let's say an example for us, a drip cotton field or greenhouse tomatoes? Try to get all this laid out up front in a protocol. So if you are visiting with a specialist or someone that you're trying to get involved, you can show them that protocol and they can make suggestions. You can correct all that up front. And then obviously we're going to try to find a good cooperator. Now, some of us that have been in the county for more than 20 years, you know, we've got a lot of our go-to people. We know those that are not going to, you know, maybe necessarily mess things up. But try to get new people involved all the time. I mean, that's the whole point of the SEMA-NAP process, is getting these guys to see and do and believe in what it is that we're teaching through these ag demonstrations and applied research projects. Does it need to be visible? You know, so this project, it may be, you know, we get to do a lot of projects with industry folks that may have, you know, products that are not not commercially available yet. There's still numbered products, and they don't necessarily want them to be visible yet. So we may get them off the beaten path, not necessarily right on pavement, you might say, and kind of hide them back out of public eye. Or will it be, you know, a show and tell? Are we going to have a turn row meeting out there, a tour, and we want it on the pavement? We want it where we can gather a crowd. So all those things, when we're, you know, selecting a cooperator, needs to go into that planning process. Make sure we've got all the equipment that we're going to need. Are we going to need a planter and a tractor? Spray, sorts of things that we may need from the beginning of the project through the completion of the project, and whether that comes from the producer, a specialist, industry again, whatever it might be, we need to get all that laid out. We need to get it located and reserved. for the time that we need to use it. And then moving on here, we've always got to communicate, particularly with our cooperator, but with everybody that's involved, other agents. Hopefully you're including maybe some other agents in your surrounding county. Take advantage of a good project and get as many people involved and share the wealth of a good project. But again, clearly spell out the expectations to a cooperator. They don't like surprises. I know the last time we gathered in April, we heard some stories about some surprises that producers didn't like, and it really has a cost. And so let's don't have that situation pop up. And what they're the expectations of that cooperator, the actions and activities that will be going on in that particular field. And finally, but not least by any means, is always think about safety. We don't want anybody getting hurt, whether it's chemical safety, safety of the animals that we may use in a project, equipment safety. We've all seen horror stories of PTO shaft, accidents, and also sanitation. And what I mean by that, of course, here on throughout Texas, we've got the fear of FOV4 that, and we've got more Pima cotton moving in, and that's our concern that we're going to have this fusarium disease move in here in the high plains and really hurt our upland cotton industry. Well, we don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. And so always practice sanitation. So all these safety things, keep in the front of your mind and in your planning process as well. All right, going on to the next category and listing some of the characteristics of success. Proper timing. We've got to implement these projects at the right time, unless you're trying to do a goof plot. Let's say if it was a weed control project and you demonstrate, what poor results you get from applying when the weeds are too big. So I guess that timing would be off, but that's intentional. But always have in mind when you're going to start. For us right now, the good soil temperature and moisture for planting cottonseed, as an example, and implementing a cotton variety trial. I gave an example there of weeds, and so, is it a pre-emergence test or a post-emergence test? So proper timing of implementation is critical. Never rush through these things. Be patient. Don't make mistakes. And it goes back to not just messing up the project, but safety as well. So when you're going out to the field, lay it out properly. Have the proper measuring equipment, whether it's a big tape measure, a measuring wheel, whatever it might be, and know how to use it. I run into a lot of young agents that have never used a wheel, and that's understandable. They don't necessarily teach that stuff in college or in high school, and they should, some classes possibly, but know how to use that equipment and then stake it out properly. Create the plots that you're going to treat. And in different situations, I mentioned staking a plot. For example, a lot of times when we're doing a planting type project where we're, let's say, planting a variety, we'll put those stakes right dead center in the plot, in the front of the plot, so that when the tractor driver pulls up, he knows where to line up to get started. And of course, a lot of these guys now are, driven by their GPS equipment, can lay it out pretty quickly. But think about that. Now, that's not a permanent stake right there. You generally don't mark a plot right in the center. We usually look at plots like we're looking at a page on the book. And so if we're standing at the front of the plot, we read it from left to right. And so generally we put a permanent marker in the front left corner. And also, before you get started, if you need to do any pre-treatment counts, I know a lot of our insect type work, we want to go in there and make insect counts, or if you're doing brush counts or something like that, weed density type counts, if you're doing a post-emerge type product. So get all that out of the way before you get in there and start treating, planning, whatever it is you might be doing. Get all those pre-ratings out of the way. And then start, planning, spraying, spreading, transplanting, tagging, whatever the project is and requires to do, and do it right. And always be efficient with the cooperator's time. I kind of hark on that because I want to get those guys moving on. Their time's precious. That's money to them. They can, in fact, if you can release that producer and do a lot of that yourself, or have a farmhand do it with you, that's fine too. And I mentioned marking the plots based on the project. If it's a weed control or something where we're in a row crop situation and it's only going to be used for, 2, 3, 4 months, we can put a simple 1-foot garden stake up in the front. But if it's more of a, let's say a brush control project that you may carry on for a year, even 2 years, to see the death and decline of brush, you may want to put some more permanent markers, rebar or something like that, painted fluorescent orange. I remember we did a project on some salt cedar a few years ago, and we marked trees, and that was a huge mistake. You don't just put ribbon around a tree that you're killing, because in a 16-month time, hopefully those trees have deteriorated such, and I guarantee you won't find those markers. So do it right, and if you have questions, always ask a specialist or an agent that's had that kind of experience in laying those kind of plots out, and having some kind of marker that you can always go back to those sites, and document everything that you do, and always date the the visit, and of course, if you're planning, we make note of temperatures. I would even go to the point of doing GPS on at least one corner, if not all 4 corners. Make notes on landmarks and mistakes, because I guarantee you go out 2 months from now or at harvest time, it's going to look different, and you could very well lose your bearings especially if you've got more than a couple type projects. And always take pictures or videos. I think that's if we can document this stuff, that helps us when we, not only in our reporting. And here's just an example. This was a early spring burn down before we got into planning. It was some winter weeds. We were going in with a post-emerge product. This just two rows by about 30 feet, and we simply put these garden stakes out there with the treatment, and you can see that it's laid out throughout the field there. So just an example of that. Here's one of a harvest aid trial. Now, because we're not going to have movement through this field, until we get into harvest, we did put these signs dead center in the plot. I think these were 8-row plots, so this is between rows 4 and 5, and it has the treatment on there. If I zoom in a little closer, you can see that it even has the date that it was applied. So properly marking these, it's not only for our use, but something like this where it's a demonstration. Of course, it's for the public to, when they drive by, they can walk in there on their own time and kind of be explained to what's going on there, as well as one of these demonstration signs that we should all have that kind of attracts the attention to the field. It kind of tells them that it's our project, and then of course you lay out the signs for each of the plots. And just again, the note taking is critical. You need to have the date and the cooperator and some other details. This was at planting, and so we had 11 varieties, and you can see there the first variety, 4792, was on the north end, and we moved to the south. So taking good notes is a really critical part of implementation, so that when you go out at subsequent dates that you don't get turned around, or you can share those notes with somebody else. Now, these are handwritten notes. I would highly suggest then that you put them in an Excel file or something like that, where it's more of a permanent type project. Here's again a variety trial, and you'll learn these things through the years to be more efficient. Years ago when we were just 4, 6, 8 row type equipment, we would literally pull every box off and dump the seed out when we were finished with a particular variety. But when we start getting 10, 12, 16, 24 row equipment, pulling each of those boxes off and dumping seed out just is really inefficient use of that producer's time. And so I think most of us use some kind of a generator with a shop vac, and we vacuum that seed out and get as much of the bulk seed. And a lot of times we'll turn the drive on to kind of drop as much of that seed that's left. But that's just an efficient method of using that producer's time. And I think those kind of things you learn through the years. Now, it's not the final step, but one of those stages then is evaluation. And we've got to follow the plan that we laid out, but at the same time, we can always come up with, especially if we get a specialist involved and they say, hey, well, what about, making this count, or making, fuller use of this project by maybe kind of rating this situation. So you can always add to it, but make sure that you, again, follow the plan and evaluation and take all those steps into consideration. Write the evaluation on the calendar or some kind of electronic reminder so that you don't, if you got to make a stand count every 2 weeks, write that down on the calendar and do it on a regular basis of what, to accomplish the project completely. Get help. If you got a huge database, if you're making insect counts is a good example, get help if you need it. Get your fellow agents involved. As I mentioned, that always is a help. Or if it's something that you can get even 4-H volunteers involved. I know one year we did some bee counts. We had the kids sit at a pumpkin plant and view a set of flowers and count the visiting pollinators and write down what they were. It was a pretty simple thing, but we used about a half dozen kids to make notes like that, and it was a pretty successful project. Ginger, would you please mute your mic? So know how to rate, what to rate, get all that up front, how to do this, the proper timing, ask a specialist. You sure don't want to mess up here. This, you've implemented it properly. So in the evaluation process, don't drop the ball. And it's just as important as any step. So always take good notes, even, not just in the implementation, but in the evaluation, date everything again, and put the cooperator's name on there so that when you're looking at this stuff at the end of the season, or when you begin to analyze the data, share it with a specialist that may help you with statistics, then you've got some good notes there to be able to put all this together. And again, always take pictures. Pictures are a million words, and it helps, whether you're going to post it on Facebook or some kind of social media, put it in a report. You may not be able to have a gathering in the field, but if you've got pictures, that's you can use that at a meeting, a conference or something, and talk about that project in a lot of avenues. So, and always, in this evaluation process, if you're using a cooperator, be efficient with his time. Again, I just keep harking on that. And especially during harvest time, those guys get really uptight if they get slowed down on harvest. We all know the vagaries of weather, so we've got to get them in and out as quick as we can. And again, here's just an example of some notes on some things, and again, the date, the producer, and the counts. Equipment, if you're going to use, at harvest time, be efficient. And one of the things that we've learned, I really like using, platform scales, because we're not handling that cotton. Be the same way with even a grain project. If you don't have to handle that commodity very often, the better off you are, and less loss. And I think if you know how to use this equipment properly, it can be extremely efficient. I know there's some folks that don't like to use it. They have a hard time setting it up properly, but be thinking always about the efficiency of the cooperator's time as well. So in summary, again, of course, have a good plan, be ready to implement it properly, evaluate it, and then finally, use all those above those steps to make improvements, to help the viability of our clientele, the producers, or whoever it might be. It also improves the science, and it improves our skills for sure. And as an agent, we get better and better at doing these type projects through the years. And use these demonstration sites, as a good show and tell, but make sure that those cooperators involved, because again, when they do something, they really see the value in the hypothesis that we are putting forth, and then of course utilize that properly analyzed data, currently for meetings, or to help those producers at this time, but it also has a lot of future benefits. I know we often go back, many years to say, hey, we did this before, has it changed? What can we do different? But it does help improve the science and our experience and the viability of our producers and others, our clientele in general, whoever's what kind of project we're involved with. Again, I'm going to show some quick slides on some different projects. Again, this was a harvest aid. This is one that there's really not a lot of changes in these type products. So it's generally just a strip trial, but again, if we look at that sign, we can tell what the product was, when it was applied, how much water, any adjuvants. And so there's a lot of information that you really ought to put on those signs. And then, of course, this is an older demonstration sign, but maybe even have your contact, available where they can call you if they're out there on their own time looking around. If they've got questions, they can give you a call. So signage is just a really important part, particularly on the result demonstration side of things. This was a tomato variety trial. We had about 5 different varieties. We replicated actually 10 times. We had 50 plants out there, and not only we were looking at variety trials, but we were looking at a way to protect the plants from the wind. So this was just something that we worked with a couple of home growers that took a lot of vegetables to a farmer's market, maybe a little better mousetrap for them. This is just a simple variety trial. I think we all do these, but again, you see the good signage. We're gathering for a turn row meeting and a good location. We've got plenty of space for pickups and being safe. We're not all parked along the road necessarily, but anyway, design these projects where you can do a good gathering, and as an agent, then we get better and better at teaching too, when we got guys out in the field that we can talk about what we've done and share that knowledge with them. So I'm going to leave it with that. I don't know if we've got time. It looks like I'm right at to the end of my time, but I'll be glad to, if you've got questions, I guess just put it in the chat box and I'll try to respond. Dr. Drumgold, is there anything else you might want to add to that?
No, sounds good, Kerry. Good job. Thank you.
No, thank you.
If anybody has a question, we got just a minute or two that you can ask. If you have a pressing question you'd like Kerry to respond to. Kerry, you must have done a good job. Nobody has any questions for you.
Well, again, I would refer them to your document, that proven method document, and you might share that too. But it has a lot of similar discussion points in it as well.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next topic, and really the next topic is the one that really we really want to establish a base knowledge through this topic. It relates to experimental design and moving into more of our applied research trials that we conduct many times. We have to visit with you to share information. Dr. Jordan Bell, she is soil and crop science out of Lubbock. Prior to me, and just a quick short, prior to this presentation, I don't know Dr. Bell very well, and so I went and looked at some of her work to just see what kind of result demonstration work she was doing, and it was considerable. But one thing that caught my eye was the fact that back in the early 80s and mid 80s, I had a cooperator over in Crosby County, and his sons are now cooperators in in one of the trials that Dr. Jordan Bell is participating in. So, sometimes we talk about how tough it is to get these cooperators, but in reality, sometimes some of them really, really enjoy this, and they really, really look at this as a way to learn and to become better producers. So there's some of those all around the world. This is a multi-generational group out there that's doing some work that their dad had done all his life. So anyway, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Bell to visit with you about experimental design.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Dr. Drumgold. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm sure Carrie and everybody else can as well, that when we find cooperators that value our research, they request us to come back. And we actually had an instance this year where a farmer was going to plant a circle to phytogen variety, and with our race trials, we were not going to be able to use the mixed technology. And once he found out that he would not have a race trial, he changed his variety selection so that he would be able to have the race trial, because he said that he really uses that to help make variety decisions and evaluate the response to his management practices. So I really cannot express how important it is to find those cooperators and just follow the recommendations that Carrie outlined, being respectful of their time and showing up on time. I truly believe it's okay for a cooperator to wait on me, but I do not want I mean, it's truly fine for me to wait on a cooperator. I do not want a cooperator waiting on me. They are busy, and if we are not respectful of their time and their resources, we will lose them as a cooperator. And unfortunately, it's not just losing them, it's their neighbors, and they talk to people within their county, and it just sets up a bad precedence, and it takes years to overcome those bad reputations. So it's really important that just the basic details are followed in addition to experimental design. So I'm going to jump right into experimental design. Carrie did a great job outlining a lot of the principles for this. And I think it's really interesting. I always like to look at, I can get my slides to switch, the history in everything we do. And as we think about, so many of our activities, it just seems like, well, we've always done this. We have statistical classes that we've all taken in college, but somebody came up with this for a very practical reason. And the experimental design methods that we use in applied agriculture were designed around agricultural research. And there was a statistician in 1935, Ronald Fisher, who wrote a book, The Design of Experiments. And so much of what we do was based off of what he discovered, actually evaluating data. And he was hired to be a biostatistician at an experiment station in England to specifically analyze field data. And he had been given this mass of data, and it was probably lots of messy data, lots of stuff that didn't make sense. And as he went through that, he really understood that there needed to be some organization and so that and design so that the data could actually be meaningful. And that's really where the foundation of everything we do came from: the replication, the randomization, having a control. And then, of course, one of the very basic statistical procedures that we do use is an ANOVA. And he actually came up with that as well. And of course, also the Fisher analysis, for which is named for him. But nevertheless, there's the foundation of the experimental design in agricultural research. And so, it's interesting looking at that history and understanding why we still follow those procedures. So when we talk about experimental design, we are looking for, of course, responses between treatments, as well as looking for a relationship between a response and a quantitative variable. So for example, I just put a plot here from some data that I have. This was actually data that I collected with Ed Bynum, who was our extension entomologist at Amarillo. And we were looking at silage value, or the nutritive value of silage, and how sugarcane aphid pressure impacted the nutritive value of silage. And so here we have this relationship. We also have ensiling duration. And so there's lots of different factors that can be applied when we are designing an experiment, but we are able to draw these relationships between two variables. And so it can become very meaningful if the project is designed properly. So experimental design is about statistical power. We want to be certain that what we are sharing and distributing is accurate. And I know that previous presentations have addressed the demonstration versus the experiment, and why we would have just a comparison versus a replicated experiment. And there's value in a demonstration, but when you are doing a demonstration, you are demonstrating something that has already been statistically proven. And so that should be something that, as you are preparing your demonstration, as you are discussing your demonstration, also pull that research and share that research so that your producers, as well as your cooperator, understands that this practice you are demonstrating has been scientifically and statistically proven. And so with statistical power, we have the probability to use the data to make the correct decision, but we have to make sure that the experimental design was done properly so that we are using the data properly. And then also the probability that a test of significance will correctly identify the effect that is present. So as we do this, we really have to start thinking about pre-planning. And of course, with that, there is the research question. And first and foremost, that is your objective. Why are you doing this research? Why do you think this research is important? So you have to clearly define what your objective is. And these are things that you do need to write down, as Carrie said. Make your notes, write down the objective, write down if you're doing all the details about the experiment, why your cooperators value this. And as you go in and write up your result demonstration, make sure that you have this, because it will help you formulate that introduction. If you're able to articulate why this is important for your county based off of just discussions with producers, that becomes very important to have that documented. So what is the objective? Also, what is the hypothesis? And I'll go into that in a little more detail so that you do understand the difference between the objective and the hypothesis. But again, that's just that scientific process that has been discussed in previous presentations. What are factors? And then keep in mind, a properly designed experiments will minimize experimental error. And of course, that's information that will be discussed in the next presentation by Dr. Josh McGinty. So a hypothesis, this is a statement or assumption that is yet to be proved. And we all hypothesize daily, based off of just what we think, what we feel, based off of previous assumptions. We have a hypothesis about what we think is going to happen. And some of our hypotheses are very biased, because of marketing. That's the goal of marketing, is to bias our hypotheses. So for example, if I'm looking at a hybrid of corn, it is hypothesized that corn yields will increase by 20 bushels per acre using hybrid A. So, but there's also a null hypothesis. This is something that demonstrates there's actually no difference. And really, this is, as we look at designing our experiment, we are considering both. And so we want to make sure that we are not biased. We want to keep in mind that, yes, we are hypothesizing that whatever we are doing will show a difference, but we also must understand that there might not be any difference. And I know, especially with working with graduate students, it can be very frustrating when the null hypothesis is true, when we see there's no difference. But it does become very important, I think, in all of our roles to understand that that can be very good data. Just because you do not show a difference does not mean that the data is bad. That is something you are now showing your producers, that the hybrid didn't make a difference. The fertility treatment didn't make a difference. All these things that we are demonstrating or evaluating cost those producers money. And if you are very honest and you collect that data and you demonstrate there was no difference, that becomes very meaningful for those cooperators as well. So of course, thinking back to our statistical classes, there's this hypothesis statement just showing that, we have a null hypothesis. That's the statement that there's no difference. We also have our hypothesis that, our alternative hypothesis that there is the difference. But ultimately, that null hypothesis is just stating that there is no difference. So the objective, this identifies what the research hopes to achieve. So back to my example using corn hybrids, the objective of this research is to determine if hybrid A increases corn yields. So these objectives can be very simple, very straightforward. As you think about your experimental design and you think about the objective statements, do keep them simple. When you start creating very elaborate objective statements, it's very easy to lose track of what is really important. So, use very simple objective statements. This is just a visual for the null hypothesis. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the null hypothesis assumes there is no difference between two groups. So, for example, here in this example, they have light color has no effect on plant growth. The alternative hypothesis is that light color affects plant growth. So very simple when we think about the hypothesis statement as well. So also, as we think about experimental design, it is important that we have a basic understanding of the terminology that we do use, and especially when we talk about the observational units versus an experimental unit. So the observational unit is actually the statistical unit. It can be whether it's plants or livestock, whatever it is that you are evaluating. But the experimental unit is actually what is composed of many observational units. So for example, if we're looking at field plots, we have plots that are composed of lots of observational units depending on the size of the plot. Also, for example, in livestock, say you're doing a feeding trial or something, a pen of cattle is going to be composed of many observational units. So the experimental factor, this is actually what you are determining or evaluating. This is your treatment, and these are independent variables. This is what you apply to your experimental unit. So it could be a pesticide, a variety, livestock ration. Also, that you have to keep in mind, though, that the experimental unit should be a function of your objective. So for example, say you're in livestock and you're doing a grazing study to evaluate stocking rates on native pasture, the livestock now become the treatment. So you have your experimental unit, but you also have the treatment when you're looking at, say, 10 head versus 20 versus 30. It can change depending on what your objective is. So that's why it's very important to have your objective first, so that as you are applying your treatments and you have an understanding of your design, you're making sure that these are applied properly. So again, you need a well-defined objective to design your experiment. So moving right into the principles of experimental design, as I mentioned, Fisher, this is really what he started with. We have replication, randomization. In many publications, we also include size now, as well as that control. And Pat Porter and Murillo Maeda, they have a revised publication on experimental design and statistical analysis for agents. And much of this presentation actually does follow what they have outlined, and I'm not for sure if y'all have been provided with that document yet, but that document does a very good job outlining the principles of experimental design. So when we talk about replication, of course, this is something that allows the researcher to calculate a mean and determine the variation between experimental units. And so this, first and foremost, is what really does differentiate an applied research project from a results demonstration. When you have just a side-by-side comparison between two treatments, you are not able to calculate a mean. You are not able to determine if there is statistical variation between those experimental units. So replication is what gives your research project power. 3 replications are the minimum number that is acceptable, but the greater the replication, the greater precision that your project will have. More replications are better, but we also must consider very practical things: the cost, the scale of the project, the equipment, time, just all of the practical considerations that do go into play. And I completely understand why. In many cases, it is preferred to do the result demonstration. It does become a matter of time. It's very hard to find time to get out to a field and do replicated projects. But if you really consider the value of your project and the power that it could have if it's replicated and done properly, it is worth your time to do the replications if the research has not been previously proven, as I mentioned earlier. So for example, if you do not have replication, how do you know if differences are due to treatments or an underlying issue? So for example, this is looking at just some silage quality from research that we have done at Bushland. And when the sugarcane aphids first came into the high plains, we had variable sugarcane aphid pressure across our fields. And that did result in spatial variability in forage yields as well as silage quality. And so if this was just a demonstration, looking at two different hybrids, how would we know, if the difference was actually due to the hybrid or due to another treatment, or was it due to the sugarcane aphid infestation? So having those replications also does allow you to account for spatial variability within a field. And then of course, as Josh will go into more depth on, really minimize that experimental error. But you can see right here how biased this would have been, if we were trying to discuss forage quality. Well, that was purely due to an insect infestation, and you can see this is actually the chopped forage, had nothing to do with the actual forage itself. So we want to minimize bias and error by having the replications. Now also randomization. This helps you accurately represent the population and also prevent bias, minimize error from unknown variables, like I just mentioned. This is another example from some of the forage and silage work that I've done at Bushland, and this was actually in a field where there was compaction from the previous year from silage trucks. And so if we did not have randomization, and our plots had been laid out and we had everything side by side, well, we would have had, say, several rows in here that were impacted by the compaction, but the data would have shown it was a forage issue. And so, if the more replications we have, and as long as they're randomized, we can minimize the impact of issues within a field. And of course, this is just one example. There's lots of things within fields that can cause problems. Sometimes we'll see nozzling from pivots that cause very similar issues to this, differences in soil texture, differences in fertility, just lots of different aspects that can cause issues within fields. So it's very important that we do have that randomization so that we minimize impacts, especially in large plot research within fields. So how do we randomize? We can assign treatments, or we need to assign treatments, a number, letter, color. People have different codes that they like to use. It can be done very simply. You can just flip a coin. You can roll dice, use cards. I've known of people who have put treatments in envelopes and shuffled envelopes and then opened the envelope to apply the treatment. Also, there's a random function in Excel, and you can use that random function and it can randomly assign those treatments. So you do want to make sure that it is completely random, that you are not biasing the study by putting two treatments side by side repeatedly. And so that's something that's important to do. Of course, if you only have 2 to 3 treatments, it becomes very hard to have something that's fully randomized, but nevertheless, that's where flipping a coin does help, just to have some randomization. So also size, and the observational unit, how many observational units will be in an experimental unit? And so that really does become, what is the plot size? For example, if we are looking at crop yield and we only have 10 plants in an experimental unit, well, that's not going to really provide us a very good representation of the yield across an entire field. So we do want to make sure that we have a very representative experimental unit. The greater the number of, actually, sorry, this should be observational units within the experimental unit, the greater the power. And so this is just showing that, as your experimental units per treatment also increase, that increases as well. So that's also accounts for the size, the number of replications within that size as well. So this is an example of a just the scale of some research plots that I have for a cover crop plot. This is actually looking at a full center pivot, and we only have 3 treatments. So very simple, but they are spanning the full width of that pivot. So the plots themselves are anywhere from 1,400 feet to almost 2,500 feet in length, but they are replicated, and they are spanning that pivot. So size is something to consider, and that can be very important as we discuss our field research. And then, of course, we also want to make sure that we have our control, and that provides us a point of measure. It allows us to assess change. Now, when we are doing variety trials, sometimes we will include, or hybrid trials, the producer's variety or the producer's hybrid, depending on what they are growing, and that does provide him a check. It also provides him an assessment of change within his own field and on his farm. And so that's something that I do like to do, is include the cooperator's variety if he chooses to do that. Also, in our herbicide research, it's very important that we do have a running check beside our herbicide treatments. It does provide us a very good visual for a side-by-side comparison. How accurate is that treatment? If we do not have the control or the check, we really do not know, how much or what the impact of that treatment or factor is within that experiment. So as we talk about experimental designs, we've talked about, the importance of the replication, the randomization, the control, and the size, but there's also different experimental designs that are utilized. There's the completely randomized design, a randomized complete block design, and this is really our standard for our field research. There's also those split plot designs and factorial designs, and I'm going to briefly go into all of those. Okay, so a completely randomized design is just like it says. All of those treatments are completely randomized. So this is an example of 7 treatments, 1 control plus the actual 6 applied treatments. And that control should always count as one of your treatments. And so with this, there's 4 replications and 28 plots. It becomes very easy to design just because you have these just fully randomized plots that are out there, but it is less accurate because it does increase the risk of experimental error. And that is because, sometimes we are not fully accounting for spatial variability, especially in plot research. And so that can really increase the risk of experimental error there. Now, the randomized complete block design does have every experimental treatment grouped in a block. Treatments are randomly applied to those experimental units, and the number of blocks equals the number of replications. And so depending on who you're working with, I know many people like to just talk about their reps. Many people do use the term block, but the replication and the blocks are equal. The pros to using a randomized complete block is that it minimizes error associated with spatial variability in a field. And cons with using this is that error between blocks and missing data may increase error. And so that's something that can be problematic, especially if you do have error within a block. Also, there's a split plot design, and I use split plot designs quite a bit, whether we are looking at planting dates, tillage, irrigation treatments. It does provide us the flexibility to essentially take 2 randomized complete blocks and actually have those almost in 2 side-by-side projects. So your main plot is the factor of the experiment, whether it's your irrigation, your tillage, your planting date. And in this example, and this is actually a dryland corn project that was at Bushland several years ago, and we had two hybrids, or two planting dates, sorry. Here's a hybrid at 2 populations, planting date 1. Here's the same hybrid, planting date 2. And so that allows us to block those treatments by planting date. So the subplots are the blocks or replications that are applied within the main plot. And the treatments, are randomly allocated within each replication, like a randomized complete block. So that works really well for planting date type studies. Planting dates being the main plot, and then the population, the subplot within the main plot. Also, factorial designs. Factorial designs do allow us to look for compounded treatment effects. So you can use this when you have an experiment where there are 2 or more treatments. So here's another example from some work we did with silage, looking at harvest stage. We had hard dough and soft dough. We had forage processing, where we had berries that were whole or berries that were cracked. And then we had ensiling duration, where we actually took the forage. We had 0 days fresh forage. We had 30 days of ensiling. We had 60 days of ensiling, and we had 120 days. And what we were actually looking at was the effect of the ruminal starch digestion. And so we worked with the animal scientists on this and put them in cannulated spheres. And so we were able to have this factorial where we had those 4 different factors and actually evaluate the impact of that. So factorial design can be very handy if you are looking at multiple factors. And then, of course, one really important consideration I think should be made in field plot research is year. This is actually looking at 2 different years in Dallam County. These are wheat plots with Mike Bragg, who's the county agent up there, and looking at the exact same varieties in 2 different years, 2019 and 2020. And so if we have data from multiple years, we can account for the environmental by the management and those genetic influences. For example, if we only had yield data from 2020, it might have appeared that some of these varieties were not well adapted, did not perform well, but it had nothing to do, or I shouldn't say nothing, but the genetic influence wasn't the greatest impact. It was actually those environmental factors, as well as we had a well that went down this year in 2020. So there was a management impact also. And I know from visiting with producers that that can become one of the greatest complaints about university-based data, is that it takes several years to actually generate a solid data set from some of our research experiments. But it is because we do want to account for differences between years. And I think that it really becomes very important to explain that to a producer. And once they understand the value of that, they are very receptive. Many of them have been caught in situations where they have purchased something from ag industry that had not been thoroughly evaluated, and the producer becomes the guinea pig. And we often see that with some hybrids. They are not thoroughly tested. They have a quick turnover, especially in corn hybrids. And we all of a sudden wind up with a bad year, and they cave because they've never been evaluated under a bad condition. That actually happened in 2017 when we had a bad fumonisin year in the High Plains. So that is why it's very important to have multiple years for our research data. So experimental design, it does not have to be complicated though. As we talk about these different aspects, it can be very overwhelming, but it does not have to be complicated. Keep in mind that to keep your experiment as simple as possible while satisfying the level of scientific soundness and minimizing error. As Carrie said, inquire about equipment before determining your treatments. Visit the field site before you finalize your experimental design. You want to make sure that your field design actually fits in the area the producer has allocated for you. Also, is the field uniform? That's something that I like to do, is to actually get on Web Soil Survey and pull up those soil maps and actually look at variability in a field. And oftentimes we've had cooperators who have said, I'm going to allocate the west half of this pivot or field for y'all, but on Web Soil Survey, there's like a little playa in that side. And so once we explain to the cooperator, how that could create some error within a trial, usually they're very accommodating and willing to allow us to move to a different spot. So check for field uniformity, visual, but also do utilize Web Soil Survey. Discuss producer practices when defining treatments and experimental units. You do not want your research to be confounded by some of the experimental practices. You want to make sure that those practices are uniform to minimize confounded results and error within your data set. How are you going to collect your data? What data are you going to collect? And then also, how are you going to analyze your data? So subsampling is something that's also important when we talk about our field plot research. In large experimental units, subsamples increase the degrees of freedom and minimize error. Subsamples provide an opportunity to evaluate several observational units within a larger experimental unit. This is something that's commonly done by entomologists, IPM agents, especially when they're doing their insect counts. But keep in mind that those subsamples are not your replication. Also, as we think about data, we need to be thinking about the accuracy versus the precision with regards to our data. And I'm sure you have all seen these bullseye figures that demonstrate accuracy versus precision. And so, of course, if something's scattered all over, there's low precision, low accuracy. If we are pointed in one area but not right in the middle, here we have high precision but low accuracy. Our goal is to be both precise and accurate. And as we talk about the difference between accuracy and precision, precision is the degree of closeness with the measurements to each other. And that is very important with regards to our replications. And this is why we want to minimize sloppy data collection. I know, for example, if we are doing, say, race trial data, and we are harvesting, Carrie talked about some of this, we want to make sure that wherever we have our deck scale set up, that it's level. If we do have to move that scale, we want to make sure that in both locations it's level, because all of a sudden our weights could be off because of that. So the precision between those treatments would be off just due to the scale. And so we want to make sure that we are as precise as possible. And this is the repeatability. And it's very important for getting consistent results with repeated measures. Now, accuracy is the degree of closeness of those measurements to the targeted reference value. This also can be referred to in some references as the bias error. Accuracy is at measuring near the target or the true reference value. So just a visual on that, if you have your average, there is going to be, some deviation about that mean, where we do have just the variability between our different replications, but we want to make sure that it is as close as possible. And then, of course, also with regards to accuracy, we want to make sure that we are as close as possible to our reference value. So an example could even be, say, like a lab balance. You want to make sure that the balance you are using, if you are using your check weights, say you put on a 50-gram check weight, well, that balance should read 50 grams. However, if you put on your 50-gram check weight and your balance reads 43 grams, well, your accuracy is way off, and everything you read on that balance is now going to be off because of that error. So accuracy and precision are very important. As we talk about the statistical analyses, what are you going to do with the data you collect? We have data analysis procedures limited by the experimental design. As I mentioned, ANOVA is probably one of the most common. This does test for the variation in the data. It tells you whether a significant difference exists within treatments, but it does not tell you anything about which treatments are different from each other. And I really like Pat Porter's statement here that he has in his guide. The ANOVA is like the Supreme Court. If an ANOVA says there is no significant difference, there are no differences, even if the significant test says there are differences. And so that's something to keep in mind, that as you look at these significant tests, you want to first and foremost make sure that you are evaluating the significance of your ANOVA before you consider the significance tests. So the significance test will actually allow you to determine which treatments are most significant. So when we interpret our statistical output, there's some very basic descriptive statistics that can be used. The mean is the average. The median provides details about the distribution of the values. The standard deviation, I think, is a very simple and a very strong tool that we can use to demonstrate variation within a field. It provides you the deviation about that mean. So for example, if this dot is your mean, these are standard deviations. It shows you how much variability there was within that data within the field. And you do want to have those standard deviations as close to the mean as possible. If you have outliers within that field, you will be able to pick that up by the standard deviation. The standard error is the deviation of the population, and then the coefficient of variation is a measure of the variability. And that's also a very strong descriptive statistic that we can use for our field plot research. So with descriptive statistics, we can use Excel. I know that in visiting with some agents, they've asked about software, and you do not have to have statistical software for basic statistical analyses. You can use lots of those basic tools within Excel. But first and foremost, before you move into actually using some of the statistical tools, I think we should always plot data. I spend a large amount of time just plotting data before I do anything because I am a visual person. It helps me visualize if there's any outliers and really see what went on. When we have large data sets with large numbers, sometimes it's hard to see if there was an outlier. And if you've plotted it, then you can get a very quick visual before you go in and run your statistics. So there is an analysis tool pack in Excel. It has very basic statistical functions that allow you to provide these descriptive statistics. And descriptive statistics, if I can even say it, are exactly what it says it is. It describes values that summarize the data set. So this is going to be, your mean, your median, standard deviation, those very basic statistics. So in conclusion, good experiments are designed. Good designs have statistical power. This provides you the ability to make the correct decision. Improper interpretation of data will invalidate the research. And so that does come from bad statistics. And also, do not hesitate to call or consult a specialist about the design and data analysis for your experiment. And then for more details, as I mentioned, there is the experimental design and statistics guide for Texas extension agents that Pat Porter and Merlo Maeda have revised this year. And that's a very good resource that provides more data based off of what I said. But feel free to also contact me with any of your questions. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Bell.
Dr. Bell, I have one regarding to our project that we're doing. So when we're answering the question, do we need to answer in the null hypothesis format then? I know I sent you that email earlier. I didn't know if I need to go in and correct that by chance since we're on the topic.
So Mason, I really apologize. I have not reviewed your extension demonstration proposal yet. But it is on my list of things to do. Dr. Drumgold's presentation actually did trump my review of your proposal, but I will get that to you. So I will look and see what you did propose. But it is important in there to go ahead and state that. Mason, just for everybody who's on the call, Mason's actually evaluating the impact of hay cutting on prussic acid demonstration, and does it question, you know, how if it dissipates in the windrow and in the bale, and so go ahead and state your hypothesis in there, and what is your objective. And so I think that you had some of that information in some of your previous drafts, but I will look at that.
Okay, yeah, because that's one thing. The objective I've put them in. They're not in a null hypothesis format. They're in a basic, like this is a question that we're looking at versus like the broad statement. So
I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I think that the null hypothesis is, you know, pretty much assumed. You know, I mean, I don't think you have to state that the null hypothesis is that there's no impact. You could just state that, you know, you hypothesize that prussic acid will not dissipate. The objective of the research is to, you know, evaluate prussic acid dissipation.
Okay.
I will look at that.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Bell.
Sorry for not getting it to you yet.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
We have with us Josh McGinney, and Josh is a extension specialist out of Corpus Christi, and I know has a long history and a history there in that district of being very helpful with result demonstrations in the field and conducting a lot of good applied research there in that region of the state. So Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, we're going to talk about experimental error, the sources of that error, and some things that we can do as far as our experimental design, our plot layout, some of our data collection methodology to reduce or minimize error. There's nothing we can do to eliminate these, you know, just natural variation in the field that leads to some error, but we can do some things to minimize it as much as possible. A lot of my examples are going to be row crop focused. That's my science, but we can apply this to a lot of other areas of interest. So experimental error can be thought of a couple of ways. First is the difference between the value that we measure and the true value of that treatment, meaning that let's say if we're counting insects in a plot, okay, we're only counting certain plants. We're not able to count insects on all the plants in that plot. So the error could be the difference between those few subsamples that we take and the true value for that plot. It could be that we're collecting yield data from, you know, a small subsample out of a very, very large plot. Well, chances are there's going to be some difference between that small subsample and the acre plot that it came from. That's some of our experimental error. The other way we can think about it is the differences among experimental units treated alike. In the first session of this training, Dr. Parker had a really good example where he showed actual yield data from a field that was planted to the same hybrid of corn. So you had individual combine passes that were harvested and weighed out. And you could see a lot of variation from one pass to the next across that field. Well, those, if you thought of them as experimental units, those were alike. They were planted to the same hybrid. They were probably fertilized the same. It's all in the same field, so some uniformity in soil. But there's differences. Okay, there's inherent variation in the environment that leads to these things. And so one of the ways that we can get around or minimize these sources of error is through our basics of plot design and layout, and that is randomization and replication and the way that we collect data. This is some actual field data from this spring, actually, here at Corpus Christi, that I'm going to use to demonstrate this a few times. So this is a cod variety trial, very simple thing. We do this in a lot of the counties. Typically, we'll replicate this 3 or 4 times in a research trial. But let's say that this trial was planted as a strict demonstration. We just have single passes, single plots of these varieties. And so I went out to this trial and I just collected stand counts on the first rep. Okay. And you look at these data and, you know, without any interpretation, you would say, okay, well, that PX variety had the best emergence, followed by that Delta Pine 1646, followed by the 2020, and then the worst was 20B037. But the problem is this isn't replicated. Okay, so I have no confidence that the emergence of these varieties has anything to do with the variety itself. Okay, it could be that that 20B037 plot was just planted in the worst place in the field. It was planted over on an edge. Deer might have come by and clipped a lot of those plants, or maybe it was planted a little off the row. It was planted into some tire tracks, so we didn't have good seed placement. There's a number of things that could have caused this, but because it's non-replicated data and I can't apply any statistical tests to this, again, I don't have any confidence saying that one variety had better emergence than the other. So replication helps us out with this tremendously. No matter what we do, there's always going to be some variation in the data that isn't coming from the treatments, but if we replicate, we can minimize that to an extent. Also, if data is being collected, any data off of that plot, replication is a must. If we're going to represent data in a newsletter or an email blast, it needs to come from a replicated trial, because we need to have some confidence in those numbers. A few times through this training, folks have mentioned the difference between applied research and a result demonstration. I like to think of it like this, that we can always use an applied research project as a demonstration, but you can't really do the reverse of that. Meaning that if we just have a non-replicated demonstration, we can't really collect data on it, but we can certainly go out and put out a replicated trial and bring folks by over the course of the season and sign that first rep, use it as a demonstration. But at the end of the year, we have good solid data coming from that replicated trial. So how many reps do we need? Dr. Bell mentioned this. 3 is the bare minimum. Okay. On some of these very large trials where we've got mile-long plots or half-mile-long plots, it's difficult to do more than 3 in a lot of cases. But keep in mind that 3 is the bare minimum. So if we lose anything over the course of the season, we may have issues using that data at the end of the year. So it's always a good idea to plant or begin the trial with more than you need, because, you know, in case of field crop plots, we're initiating a trial that we hope will be there 5 months later to harvest. Well, in 5 months, a lot of things happen. Wildlife damage coming from the edges is a big problem. Could be a heavy rainfall that drowns out part of the field, things like that. So it's always a good idea, if you can, even with the large scale plot, to try to get 4 reps in case something happens and we lose some plots. We still want to have at least 3 replications of each treatment at the end of the year be able to statistically analyze that data. More than 4 reps is really difficult on these large plots. You're looking at a lot of land, a lot of seed, a lot of hassle for the cooperator as well. You know, you're looking at a half a day at planting time for some of our plots and a full day, if not maybe a couple of days on the harvest end of that. So 4 reps is kind of the max on these big variety trials, but you know, at smaller scales, more reps is much easier to do. So small plot, I like to have 4 as a minimum, and in many cases we'll have more than that. Also, you know, depending on what you're looking at, you might really need more reps than 3 or 4. One example from the world that I work in is pre-emerge herbicide trials. We'll go out to a cooperator's field and let's say, yes, we have this weed here, but you don't really know where the weed's going to come up until a few months down the road. So you put out a lot of pre-emerge and you hope that there's going to be some weed pressure there. There isn't always. And so we might put 6 reps. We've gone as high as 8 reps on a few locations just because we know there's some variability in the pest pressure there. We want to make sure we have at least 3 or 4 that wind up having good pest pressure in them so we have good quality data. So going back to that example of plant populations, this is that same data set, but now I'm showing all 3 or all 4 replications. And, you know, now we have a little better picture of what's going on in this field. That PX variety still looks good emergence. Delta Pine 1646 is fairly uniform, but the other 2 varieties, now we have some issues going on there. We have a lot of variability, especially with that Delta Pine 2020. And so if we had just looked at the first rep, we would have said that variety is not coming up very well. But when we start to look at reps 2, 3, and 4, we can see, you know, okay, there's some variability. It's probably because of where those individual plots happen to land. You know, poor emergence, you know, might have just been a sorry plot, or the planter was set down a little off the row. Things like that can happen. But, you know, the other reps have better emergence. That 20B037 that looked horrible in the single replication data, now we can see it's, you know, it's not great, but it's better than what that first rep would have led you to believe. So now we have enough data here, we have enough replication that we can apply statistics and have some confidence in the data that we represent to growers. And once we apply statistical tests, this has gone through an ANOVA test. We've also separated the means using Fisher's LSD. Now we can represent this to growers and say, okay, well, the best emergence was indeed with that PX variety. The 2 Delta Pines, though, were very similar. Okay, that single replication data I showed you initially wouldn't have led you to believe this, but as we analyze the data, we can see that those 2 perform very similar in their emergence. And then the 20B037 had the lowest emergence. But we have some confidence. We have a lot of confidence when we represent data like this because we have enough replication behind it to give us that confidence. The other thing that we can do to minimize that error is the randomization of our plots within a replication. So that's the random allocation of treatments to individual experimental units. And that helps reduce error a couple of ways. Number one, it helps reduce any bias that we might have as we're laying this plot out. It's really easy to start to think, especially for like herbicide trials, okay, well, I know I'm going to have to spray this treatment 3 or 4 times, so I might want to put it over here where it's closer to the other treatments just like it. Well, that might make it easier for you as you're going out and spraying these plots, but we might be unintentionally introducing some error there by grouping those treatments or those plots close to one another. Okay, we might be putting those in a part of the field where they're going to perform differently than they would have in other locations in that trial. So remove some bias. Another thing that happens on occasion is we'll have certain treatments that might influence adjacent plots. We try to manage this ahead of time by having the right plot size to minimize or eliminate that, but sometimes it happens. A lot of times non-treated control plots can be an issue for the adjacent plots. If we're not randomizing the layout of those treatments, we might unintentionally place a treatment next to a non-treated control a few times. And that would be a problem if there's some influence happening there. So we're removing more of that error by randomizing the layout of our treatments. And we can do that a couple of different ways. The easy one, write down numbers on pieces of paper. Those are your treatment numbers, and then pull those out of a hat at random. And that's how we're going to lay them out in the field. I like to do as much in the comfort of the office as I can, so that when we get to the field, all we have to do is follow a plot plan and get that plant or that trial planted, sprayed, whatever we're doing. So I do this in Excel ahead of time. Very simple to do. You lay out your plot numbers in one column. Next to that, your treatment numbers, like you see in the upper left, and then use that random between function. In this case, I'm telling Excel to generate random numbers between 1 and 100. Okay, then we drag that down. It lays out those random numbers. Then we'll sort our treatment in that random number column in any order that you please, largest to smallest, smallest to largest, it doesn't matter, but that will randomize your treatment order. And so I'll sit down ahead of time, I'll randomize my treatments for all of the reps of that trial. I'll go ahead and build a plot plan. And on the day we show up in the field to do this, all we have to do is get started, measure out some plots, place some flags, and here we go. We don't have to waste a lot of time and waste the cooperator's time doing this randomization. So I want to give a few examples here of how we actually implement these plans going into a field trial. Again, my science tends to be more row crop focused. That's where my examples are going to come from. First one is kind of easy. This is a field here in Nueces County, southern part of the county. We're on the coast. It's flat. It's very uniform out there. This is kind of a best case scenario. Okay, pretty easy. We do a little planning ahead of time. Look at the soil map, NRCS web soil survey that Dr. Bell mentioned. And, we can see we've got primarily one soil series here. It's Victoria clay, which is very common across this area. We know there's very little, if any, elevation issues, topography to deal with. It's flat. We're in the coastal plains. But one thing that comes up as you look at this satellite imagery, in the lower left-hand corner of that field, it does look like there might be a little bit of a drainage issue. So when water does collect, it tends to run off into that corner. Talk to the cooperator, we find out, yeah, that is the case. So we've got a fairly uniform field. It's a big field, half-mile long rows. We're going to put out, say, a variety trial on this field. I'm not too concerned about avoiding any major issues other than that drainage issue down in the bottom. So we're going to get away from that. We're going to move up to the north end of the field, and we're going to lay out our replications and then our random order of plots within those replications from there. In this case, this is in a heavy row cropped area. I'm not too worried about wildlife. There's not range or pasture next to this. I think 3 replications is sufficient, and these are big, long rows. Okay, big plots. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of seed to cover them. So 3 is okay in this scenario. If I was worried about losing some plots due to hog damage or javelina damage, I might plant 4, but that's not the case here. This is a little more difficult scenario, and this is a field that we've used for variety trials for a number of years. It's just a little tougher to deal with because we have a lot of variation. This is further towards the hill country. We've got some rolling country. We've got extremely variable soils, but we've used this field a number of times and produced a lot of good high quality data. It just takes a little more planning. And so, we've got some slope to deal with. You can see the soil map overlay here. We've got a number of different soil types. There's also that area kind of in the north end of that field that tends to burn up. Okay, and this is where visiting with the cooperator ahead of time is a very good idea, because if I had never been in this field before, I might not know that that's an issue. But that grower's put a crop on this field for 20 years. He knows that area has really shallow soils. It's sandy. It doesn't hold water very well. we get moisture stress there much quicker than we do in the rest of the field. So we've got a lot of things to deal with here, but a little bit of planning goes a long ways. We know we've got some soil variability. We're not going to eliminate that with the size of trial that we're going to do here, but we can try to limit that. We're going to avoid that area of the field that doesn't perform well, that has the really shallow sandy soil. We're going to come further south to get away from that. We do have that slope to deal with, but the rows are already running perpendicular to those terraces that you can see in the photo. So we really can't plan around that. We've got to run the way that that field is set up. But what we might do is increase our reps to 4. This is a big trial. These are long grows, but I do have some concerns about the variability here. I'm also very concerned about wildlife damage because we've got pasture and rangeland around it. So in this case, we're going to go to 4 reps. And when we've done 4 reps on this field in the past, we've had very good data. When we've done 3 rep tests, it gets a little messy because of all these sources of variation. The last thing to think about very quickly is about your data collection and your sampling methodology. Let's say on these very long row plots, we're conducting our yield estimates based on little subsamples, or it could be plant population counts, it could be plant height, it could be pest counts, things like that. But these are big plots. If we're going to take small subsamples, how are we going to do that to minimize the error? On the left-hand side is what happens a lot of times. We come out in the middle of summer, it's hot, it's dry, we're all miserable, so we just walk into the field a little ways and we conduct our subsample. And we just walk across the rows and do that from plot to plot. Problem with that is you can see if we had done that in this case, we're going to sample from different soil types here. There's going to be some small differences in elevation. I really want to have multiple subsamples rather than the single point data collection that we're doing here. So really a better scenario in this case would be what we do on the right-hand side, where we're taking multiple subsamples. In this case, it's 3. On big plots like this, it might be 10. Okay, we need to take a lot of subsamples so that we have some confidence that those data do represent the whole plot. And in this case, we're sampling from similar soil types at similar elevations across the field. We're going to sample some down here at the bottom on a uniform soil. We're going to come up here and sample between these 2 terraces, again on a uniform soil, uniform elevation. And then we're also going to come up here on top of the hill, sample between these 2 terraces and do the same. That's going to give us much higher quality data with less error. But that's one of those things you really need to visit with your specialists about, because our sciences differ a little bit, and the way that you sample also changes depending on the experimental design, the layout of the plots. But visit with your specialists. We're all experts in our narrow fields of science. So with that, I think I am right on time. Folks, here's my contact info, my email, my cell phone. Anytime I can help with anything, please give me a shout.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McGinty. Appreciate your time and effort on this. Very, very good presentation, and there may be some questions. I can pose them to you either in writing or possibly give you a call sometimes if there's some questions arise. We're going to move on to our next topic. The next topic we're going to talk about, we're going to have 2 different speakers talk about this. We have Dr. Joe Pascal, who is a livestock or beef cattle specialist out of Corpus, and Dr. Larry Stein, who is an associate department head for horticulture and a extension specialist, and two individuals I worked with a great deal in my career, and have the utmost respect for both of these gentlemen in the fact that they both really work towards the betterment of county programs and really work toward providing good quality information to our clientele. And as we think about examples and layouts of experimental design, the row crop work kind of lends itself to that a little bit more easily. As we get into beef cattle and some of our horticulture things, we have to be a little more creative maybe, and be a little more, put a little bit different thought process to it, because that especially beef cattle is certainly a different animal in terms of dealing with experimental design and some things like that. So Joe, I'll turn it over to you to get things going.
So everybody's talked a lot about experimental design and selection and avoiding errors. So we're going to skip some of that, but I did have some points to consider, and really uniformity is the key. Josh just got through talking about it. Jordan talked about it just a minute ago, trying to reduce experimental errors. So in livestock demonstrations, the animals are not uniform. All right, they're all genetically different. They all respond to the environment different, and so as a result, anything that we can do to minimize the impact of that genetic variation on whatever it is that we're doing, whatever we're looking at, is very, very important. So I just have some thoughts on this before beginning. I'm not going to read it to you. You all have a copy of the slides. Y'all can certainly do that. Another point that I want to make in livestock result demonstrations is that keep it simple. I would not try to apply more than one or two different treatments to the individuals, to the entire group. Confounding is a big problem. Not having enough numbers is a big problem. And so pay attention to that. And then finally, as many have already said, visit with a specialist in the area that you're interested in. I have run this PowerPoint through my colleagues several times and brought in all of their suggestions and comments. So they're all interested. And even though I primarily work with beef cattle, we do have a sheep and goat specialist, Reed Redden. We have two very good dairy specialists and good swine specialists. So, if you're interested in those other species, they've also had input to these as well. So let's visit about some of these. And so I've broken them out into a half a dozen different types of demonstrations that you might be interested in, or you might be interested in looking at. Once again, you can read this as well as I can. But the idea is to think about some things that we can do to the young animal to improve weight gain and hopefully profitability. And other people have said this, but we shouldn't be doing these things unless there's an economic justification for doing it. And I realize that almost anything that we try, unless you're involved in applied research with a specialist that's working on professorial rank, most of the things that you're going to use work. Okay, otherwise they wouldn't have been approved to be used. And so basically what we're trying to do is demonstrate a practice. And so there still are some minimum requirements in my mind as far as how many animals. And I say 10 to 20 head per treatment. I've got the scales in there, and I actually prefer digital to beam scales because very few beam scales are accurate, in my opinion. And in addition, a lot of beam scales are in 5-pound increments. And that brings up a good point in terms of measuring weight. A lot of folks like to report that the weight gain was 2.56 pounds. Well, how accurate do you weigh weight? Most of us weigh weight to the single pound, and that's how it should be recorded. In several of these, I emphasize that products should be purchased, not donated. That sort of allows you to get away from the concept that maybe you might be beholden to whoever donated. Now, if the owner of the livestock that is interested in doing the result demonstration purchase them, that's fine. So that was calf weight, a young animal weight, improving reproduction in females. There's a lot of different things, a lot of simple things that can be done. Just evaluating weight or body condition score and the impact on reproduction, breeding rate, calving rate, rebreeding rate, whatever it happens to be. Reproductive tract scores can be measured in cows, and particularly in heifers. There's a lot of little things that can be done. Pregnancy results from a nutritional regime or an estrus synchronization regime. We've got some technology out there. This calving notifiers, there's 2 or 3 different ones. Moo call just happens to be one of them. That's placed on the animal near the perianal region, and will text you a message when your cow goes into labor. And then, of course, in dairy cattle, they're using pedometers on dairy cows because as a cow gets close to estrus, she walks a lot. It wouldn't be very useful in range cattle or cattle out on pasture, but certainly very useful in dairy. Then we have, replacement female development programs for the Rio Grande Valley Beef Cattle Improvement Association, the guys down in the valley. By the way, District 12 is not very well represented today because they have a faculty conference today. But so they have a multi-county, almost 22 years now running a replacement female program that goes on down there. And so I've got some, again, requirements. But, for reproductive traits, you need quite a few more females, 50 to 100 in order to see small differences. You could also demonstrate the use of ultrasound in terms of reproductive technology. So I just threw some thoughts out there. On the sire side, I know that we have a buck and a ram and a billy test out at the San Angelo station. If you have producers that participate in that, perhaps you could use that information in a result demonstration. Or sire selection, the use of EPDs in cattle or EBVs in the sheep and goats to improve progeny performance. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that are out there that can be used. Once again, we have 2 or 3 different bull gain tests scattered around. I know Jim Wells County used to have one that was very long running. There's some others. Rio Grande Valley's got theirs. So you can report on those kinds of things to demonstrate improvement. And once again, it just has some thoughts over on the right-hand side that y'all can read. Internal external parasite management. I know this is often a favorite one, and people want to try a new dewormer or a new hornfly tag or a new external parasiticide. These are probably a little bit more difficult. I know that Dr. Swigert, Sonia Swigert, our extension veterinary entomologist, has done a really good job of helping y'all conduct these on the tag side. But on the internal parasite management, I would recommend that you visit with Dr. Tom Haregrove. Tom works with us. He's our extension veterinarian. Several of y'all are already doing it. He's doing some work, I guess, with Caitlin and down with John in Burleson County and down with Greg Baker down in Calhoun County, looking at fecal egg counts. The idea that we can control fecal eggs or internal parasites completely probably doesn't wash anymore. The concept of having some sort of refusion, maybe treating 80% of the animals, I think that's, so it's important to visit with like somebody like Dr. Haregrove, because not only we need to do worm egg counts or reduction in worm egg counts as a result of these products, but maybe what's the long-term goal? And what are the eggs? And so there's a big word down there, corporate culture, that just basically means that, okay, you have worm eggs, but let's grow them out and find out what kind of worm eggs they are. Are they critical ones? And then, of course, the PCR genetic analysis of the different types. And in the past, we used to think about, particularly for internal parasite management, we had to have separate herds. Well, that's pretty difficult to find 2 herds that are separate, but exactly on the same type of pasture, just like Josh showed you. We have different soil types. And so, we can expect different forage growth and different rainfall. So maybe we do those in the same herd. Maybe we actually treat those animals in the same herd, the control and treatment. But so that's why it's important. It's not just as simple as going out there and injecting them with an antibiotic, with a parasiticide or dumping a poron on them. We need to think a little bit more about this design for this particular type of trial. This is a really interesting trial. Many, many years ago, 40-something years ago, I taught a livestock marketing class, and we used to send our students to a local sale barn to do some livestock price tracking for one day. Down here in Corpus with an ag economist from a couple of ag economists ago, we started this, and basically a lot of agents in District 11 and 12 that have a sale barn in their county, and not everybody does. I realize about half the counties don't. Some counties probably have 2 or 3. Would go to a specific sale barn and just basically track pricing of the livestock. And it kind of made an interesting result demonstration, particularly over time, depending on what it was that you were collecting. So you get permission from the local commission company and go out there and record the date, the weight, the gender, the breed or breed cross, or color. And actually color works pretty well unless you can actually determine some of these black cattle, what they might be. But and how the prices, we can talk about price slides. We can talk about differences between genders, steers versus heifers versus bulls, whether or not the cattle are full or gaunt. So there's a whole bunch of things that can be discussed in this type of a result demonstration. And it's not a typical result demonstration, but I still think it's important to use, that we can use. Forage and hay production. Of course, I worked with Dr. Wayne Hanselka for many, many years, standing here, our range specialist, and he was really interested in forage growth and stocking rates and how grasses grow and how much did you have to leave, particularly in the drier parts of the southern part of the state, in order to get good grass growth. But the rest of the state's also worried about that, and also round bale weights and quality of the grass and quality of the bale and storage. So there's a whole bunch of information, whole bunch of different types of demonstrations, and they don't have to be real detailed. I remember Corey Bowen doing a result demonstration one time. Basically, it was more of a demonstration where he had a guy pick up 4 round bales out of his field that he was storing. They were all different sizes, different dimensions, and did crude protein and TDN analysis on it. And I think we talked about those 4 bales for about 45 minutes at a field day. And that really made producers realize storage and size and how much could be wasted, and demonstrated how to do this type of nutrient sampling. So there's some real opportunities. Work with your agronomist or your range specialist to do that. I know that Megan and Bob both, in terms of range, have done this before. And of course, to me, that's, people don't understand enough about forage or hay production, which is the basis for all animal production in the state, in my opinion. Investigation diagnostics. So this is a picture of Dr. Haregrove actually taking a liver biopsy down in Kennedy County with Frank, and I had a ranch down there that was having some problems, and they had actually had some trichomoniasis, but they also had some mineral issues as well. And so producers in every county agent, every specialist has gotten this. Producers inquire about a problem in their fields, cattle dying, what can we do? You get a phone call, maybe in one particular case in Burleson County with John, I believe it was AgCom that got the phone call and directed it back to John and Tom and myself. Go out and sample forages and look at the cattle and get the veterinarian involved. And I know that we've done that in Buffalo County, Buffalo up in Hunt County with Caitlin, and to get out there and find out what it is. So it's a little bit more detailed, but it's still, in my opinion, classifies as result demonstration, because the producers almost are always willing to share that information about what's going on in their livestock, in their pasture, because it's important to the county. Another that thought, and I'm just throwing a bunch of thoughts out here because I think that to me it's sort of wide open. It's not applied research. Okay, we're doing result demonstration. A producer or production practice surveys, and so this is an old survey that was done back in about 1989. You can see the counties that were sampled. We sampled at least 10 producers or 10% of the producers in every county. And we asked them a wide variety of questions in range and livestock, in economics and wildlife, even in home economics, as we used to call it back then. And one of the things, so that we divided this out. So the three districts that were involved actually got district-wide reports, and then every county got a report of the practices in their county. And even to this day, we can use that information to talk about what we could do, program planning. And of course, obviously, this being nearly, well, almost 30-something years old now, we've had counties that have done this and updated it for their own use. And it kind of gives you an idea of what you can do. And it also gives you a reference point of here's where we were 10 years ago. Where are we today? Or here's where we were 5 years ago. And I think it can still be done. I think it has a very useful purpose. Demonstrating a practice, I mean, really to me, that's what we're doing. A practice or a management tool. We have a multi-county reproductive workshop. It's going to be held next week. Dale Rankin does a lot of that work, but a lot of the guys in District 12 and 10 and even 11, sort of a multi-county event there at Tom Brothers Ranch. And we're going to talk about pregnancy testing, but not just about pregnancy testing. We're not going to actually just visit about that. We're going to talk about all the things that lead up to improving a calf crop. And the agents get there and they talk about body condition score and they talk about fecal pad analysis. And we opened up a couple of cows too. We talk about mouthing a cow, aging a cow by her teeth. The agents actually help do all the practices. I'm just sort of there. They do a really fine job. But so over the years, they're able to have a group of people that they can talk about, they can visit with about what they've done and how they have adopted it. What does it mean to them? What's the economic value of some of these? And so it works really well. And of course, a lot of county field days, we might work a calf, or we might do a chute side working, or whatever it happens to be. If you have several of those over a period of years or within a group of counties, I think you can talk about demonstrating the practice. And I have some examples over on the right-hand side. Soil testing, hay testing, forage testing, all those fit that you could talk about whether or not people adopted them, or what was it worth. And to me, that's important because a lot of the things are very, very simple. And most people are not doing them. Well over half of the people, even after some nearly 70 years of being able to do breeding soundness exams in bulls, about half the people in Texas still do not do an annual breeding soundness exam of bulls. And I know counties have demonstrated that. So the last couple of things that I want to point out about data collection, editing, analysis, don't be afraid to edit the data. Okay, so if you do an implant trial and all the calves gained 25 or 30 pounds and one calf didn't do any, okay, didn't gain anything, toss it out. All right. That's the way that I feel. When I did my dissertation work, my research back in the early 1980s, I know that sort of dates me. We combed that data for animals for information that didn't make sense. Maybe we misweighed it. Maybe the animal got sick. Maybe that particular animal didn't actually get an implant. Okay. And so there's good reasons to look at the data when you collect it. A lot of people talked about data collection. Try to be as precise. Don't be fast. You've spent a bunch of time putting this together. Spend some time looking at it and then continue the analysis, as many have already said. So I just have some final thoughts, okay? And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure why I was selected to give this talk other than the fact that we've done a lot of result demonstrations. I've always thought to focus on the demonstrating the practice, okay? We have a lot of technology out there that's pretty darn cheap. Forage testing, hay sampling, soil testing, pregnancy testing, ultrasound, okay? And it's pretty cheap, and the results are beneficial. And I think it's important that we start doing some of those. But the caveat is avoid product testing. If it didn't work, it wouldn't be approved. You know, leave that to the experts. I know that my colleagues in other disciplines do some of this. Okay, they're paid to do that, and some of y'all work with them getting that done. That's fine. And that's more in the applied research field. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not really, to me, a result demonstration. But if you report it as that, that's fine. You really need to think about the economics. Don't do anything that doesn't have an economic justification. So I'm going to stop right there. And if anybody has any questions, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Larry so he can take the rest of our time.